When we think about how accountability is lost, we usually picture something big, right? A loud scandal, a public resignation, but often it doesn't happen with a bang. It happens with a whisper, or maybe just the click of a delete button. A name disappears, a bio page suddenly goes dark, and just like that, there's a hole in the public record. Today, we're going to break down the anatomy of these quiet edits.
Yeah, this quote, it really nails it, doesn't it? It's this idea that when things start to get a little too hot, a little uncomfortable for people in charge, the very information we need to keep track of things can just mysteriously fade away. It's a subtle but super powerful way to control the story.
So let's get on the same page with the key term here, scrubbing. And no, you're not going to find this in some official government handbook. It's a term that watchdogs use to describe this very specific thing. The quiet act of cleaning up a digital footprint, usually after some kind of controversy hits, and almost always without any explanation.
To really get how this works in the wild, we're going to dive into a case study. We're looking at a place called Whitpain Township, Pennsylvania. And trust me, it's a really fascinating and kind of complex example of how public information can just shift under our feet. So the story kicks off in the second half of 2025. All of a sudden, you've got 4 different public officials, all tied to the local government, and their online presences just change. We're not talking about press releases or big announcements. Nope, just these quiet little digital edits that got people wondering, hey, what's going on here?
All right, so who exactly are we talking about? And what really went down? Let's dig into the evidence, look at each of these 4 cases, and see what kind of patterns start to pop up. Okay, look at this. This is where you really start to see the pattern, right? You've got Scott Badami, the board chair. His professional ties just vanish from the web. Then there's Jeff Campolongo, a supervisor, who kind of just disappears from his role. Kimberly Coach, the vice chair, changes her last name. And then you have Jennifer Stomsky, and this is key. Her removal is the only one that was actually made official in public. So you have 4 very different situations, but they all end up in the same place. A public record with a fresh hole in it.
Let's zoom in on Scott Badami's case for a second. So he's the chair of the board, a big deal in town. His official township bio proudly mentioned he was a partner at this major law firm, Fox Rothschild. But here's the thing. If you went to look him up on the firm's website in late 2025, boom, 404 not found. His entire biography just gone. Poof. And the same thing happened with a trustee listing he had at a local academy. He was still in public office, mind you, but key parts of his professional identity were totally scrubbed clean.
Now, put that quiet disappearance next to what happened with Jennifer Stomsky. This was a totally different story. Hers was loud, very public. She made some inflammatory social media posts, and right away there was this huge public backlash, a petition with hundreds of signatures, and then, bam, formal documented action by the board. You see the difference? Her situation is almost like the exception that proves the rule. Her removal was transparent and out in the open, but all those other changes, not so much.
So this all leads to the big question, the million-dollar question, really. Are these quiet edits a deliberate attempt to hide something, a cover-up, or are they just, routine, everyday updates that people are reading way too much into? Okay, so you've got 2 completely different stories here. On one hand, you have the critics and the online sleuths. And they're saying, look, this is a pattern. This is reputation management 101. It's a slick way to avoid accountability without ever having to answer the tough questions. But on the other side, there's the more, benign explanation that this is all just normal stuff. People leave jobs, websites need updating, and some HR things just have to be kept private. And honestly, you can see how both explanations might seem plausible. This line right here, rebranding without accountability, it just perfectly sums up how the critics felt. This came from online discussions about the vice chair Kimberly Coach changing her name to Klauder. Now look, it could totally be for personal reasons, like a marriage, of course. But the critics' point is this. A name is how we track an official's voting record, their history. And if there isn't a clear public statement connecting the old name to the new one, it can feel like a rebranding, one that makes it that much harder for regular folks to connect the dots on her past actions. And this quote, wow, power without explanation, this really gets to the core of why this all matters. Think about it. When an official stays in a position of power, but the context around them, their professional connections, their history, is quietly erased, it creates a real power imbalance. Suddenly, the burden shifts to you, the citizen, to play detective and piece together a story that used to be right there in plain sight. So this is way more than just some local political drama.
it points to something with much bigger implications. I mean, why should any of us care if a small-town webpage gets deleted or a name on a roster changes without a press release?
Well, this kind of silence has a very real cost. Every single one of these quiet edits chips away at public trust. It forces citizens to become investigators, hunting for information that should be easy to find. And maybe most importantly, it creates holes in the public record. Democracy, at its heart, runs on a collective memory. And when that memory gets damaged, holding power accountable becomes nearly impossible.
Okay, so if quiet scrubbing is the problem, what's the solution? What does a system of genuine, transparent accountability actually look like in practice?
So here's the alternative path. Look, real accountability isn't about things never changing. Of course they do. It's about explaining the changes. It's about documenting transitions, preserving records by adding context instead of just hitting delete, and making sure the public can always follow the story of their representatives. At the end of the day, it's about demanding more information, not just accepting less.
Which leaves us with one last, really critical question to chew on. In public life, how do we measure honesty? Is it just about what's technically legal, what's allowed, or is it about what's openly explained? The real measure of accountability isn't what our leaders are permitted to do in the shadows, but what they are willing to stand up and defend in the light. And that's a question we should all be asking, not just in Whitpain, but everywhere.